Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, dwyervip.com, on Roku, now available in the UK, Dwyer Boxing and Dwyer Sports Betting. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Bear with me, my throat's a little bit raspy today. Let's try to stay ahead of the casino. Figure this fight out before it hits the books. Kubrat Pulev today announced that he's in negotiations to fight former undisputed cruiserweight champion and former heavyweight champion David Haye in June. Let's talk about the fight. Let me say this. I went back and I was looking at the film of Vladimir Klitschko against David Haye. Fights often are very different when you go back and look at them 6 months and 12 months later than they were at the time of the fight. At the time of the fight, the feeling was that David Haye did not deliver on his promise to decapitate Vladimir Klitschko. Right? The feeling was that David Haye ran from Klitschko, didn't do much in the fight, and then complained of a bad toe after the fight to justify a subpar performance. When I went back and looked at the tape, I was actually surprised at how different the fight looks now. The fight actually shows David Haye fighting small. He's actually hunched over a bit. Vladimir Klitschko, and it's a credit to Klitschko, is actually moving well in the fight. He's out of a shell and he's literally trying to knock out David Haye. He's chasing David Haye around the ring. David Haye, who against a slower-footed, less athletic opponent, is typically an ambush fighter, actually is forced to fight in the match. There are several times in the match where Vladimir Klitschko closes the distance, throws very heavy punches. Now let me just say, it's a tribute to David Haye that David Haye is able to move his head as well as he is and roll with punches. When Vladimir Klitschko throws that straight right hand that gets a lot of men knocked out, David Haye is able to roll with the punch. Sometimes his hand's not even up. He rolls with the punch, taking the sting out of it. So when the punch lands, it no longer is a knockout punch. David Haye's upper body movement in that fight, quite frankly, is impressive. I would encourage everyone to go back and look at the fight. And keep in mind, too, the style's a bit unique because as David Haye is moving around the ring, often he's flat-footed, right? He's not an Ali. He's not up on his toes shooting a jab. No, David Haye himself is trying to set and throw power shots. As he's moving around the ring, he actually keeps his feet far apart, right? Because David Haye is hoping to get the knockout himself. And let me point out that several times in that fight, David Haye throws a right hand to end the fight. But Vladimir Klitschko is a taller man than David Haye, and if Klitschko is able to, and it's Klitschko's best move in my opinion, he's able to stick his left hand out. So David Haye's right hand continually gets blocked by Vladimir Klitschko's left hand. Let's talk about this fight. David Haye against Kubrat Pulev. Now understand, this fight is huge. Unless the Klitschkos fight each other, or either Klitschko fights Adlanir Solis, in my opinion, this fight, or Tyson Fury, in my opinion, this fight is the biggest fight currently scheduled in the heavyweight division. It might be the biggest fight this year, barring some spectacular upset in some other fight. Kubrat Pulev is unbeaten. He's light on his feet. He uses his legs for defense. right? He's not a guy who really stays in the pocket and blocks shots with his arms or other body parts, shoulders, etc. He's not that guy. He's also not a guy who is showing a lot of upper body movement, like David Haye against Vladimir Klitschko, right? He's not a Ray Leonard upper body on a swivel guy. No, he literally, when the kitchen gets hot, backs away from it, and he backs away straight, right? He carries, in my opinion, here's where it gets controversial. He carries his left hand low. He looks to me like he can be hit with a quick overhand right. Now, typically, he's been more athletic than his opponents. He's also adaptive reactive. In other words, he figures out what your weakness is, and then he'll tailor his game to attack that weakness. So, the Matt Skelton fight. He hits Skelton in the stomach with a very stiff left jab, and he has a stiff left jab. It's particularly good when he throws it to your body. He hits Skelton in the body with it. Skelton is dazed, doesn't go down, but literally turns his back and goes to the corner, right? You know, at first it almost looked like a low blow, but it wasn't. That's how sudden Skelton stopped fighting. After that, Pulev literally starts aiming for Skelton's stomach. In other words, he's literally changing his game as the fight goes along, depending on what you're doing. He ultimately gets the knockout in that fight on a body punch. It's actually one of Pulev's more impressive performances. Let me also point out that Pulev is so athletic that he's able to drop his hands in fights. In other words, he's a guy who typically is the better athlete in the ring. He's also savvy. He has a little of Bernard Hopkins in him. So, for example, when a guy comes in and grabs him, Pulev will often put his forearm on the guy's neck, and then he'll lean forward and he'll push the guy off with his forearm on the guy's neck. I'm just telling you that a lot of the injuries in boxing aren't caused by punches. They're caused by guys leaning on the back of the necks of other guys, and guys also pushing off like Pulev does, right? So understand, Pulev pushes it up to the line, right? He's aggressive with things like using elbows, right? As I said, he has a little Hopkins in him. He also has really good timing. He has a good jab, and he knows how to throw it. In other words, he keeps you off balance with it. But it's unclear to me if he can hit a moving target. I believe lateral movement will throw him off, right? A guy who is not running but moving laterally, forcing Pulev to reset, I believe, would cause him all kind of problems, especially since he doesn't strike me as being that gifted defensively, right? Let me say this. The way to beat an ambush fighter like David Haye is to follow him after the ambush. But there's a corollary to that, right? You yourself have to be able to, after you catch up with the ambush fighter, corner him and finish him off, right? You yourself have to be able to literally start throwing punches, heavy punches, and work your way inside. Pulev doesn't strike me as that kind of fighter, right? In my opinion, David Haye moves well, and gives you very little to hit. I believe he's going to bend his body, right, as he did against Vladimir Klitschko. He didn't get hit with any withering body shots by Vladimir Klitschko, right? I believe David Haye is hard to hit in the body. I believe David Haye is going to move his upper body better than Kubrat Pulev moves his. I believe David Haye's right hand has an opportunity to find a home against Kubrat Pulev. I believe Pulev is more accustomed to being chased than to being the chaser, right? And I believe David Haye has a bigger problem with the Derek Chisoras of the world. Guys on their front foot who are tracking him down, forcing him to fight, tiring him out, right? David Haye looked very tired before the Chisora knockout. Then David Haye has against guys like Pulev, who are athletic types, who themselves are more outside than inside. It's an open question whether either of these guys can fight inside. In an outside fight, I prefer the guy with the greater punching power. I believe that's David Haye, right? I prefer the guy with the quicker hands. I believe that's David Haye. And I prefer the guy who, quite frankly, is harder to hit. And I believe here again, it's David Haye. I like David Haye to win this fight. But understand, it's a high-risk play. Because David Haye himself has gone through fights, including the Vladimir Klitschko fight, where he hasn't thrown a high volume of punches. Right? The problem with Haye's style, quite frankly, is he doesn't throw enough punches to dominate the slow rounds. Right? And so, understand this is high risk. Also, pay close attention to the length of the fight. Right? You want a 12-round fight because that gives the guys 2 extra rounds, the championship rounds, to close the show. If it's a 10-round fight, that changes the game completely, right? So, to sum up, I like David Haye over unbeaten Kubrat Pulev. I believe this is the perfect fight for David Haye. I think Pulev hasn't faced an athlete like David Haye, and I believe Pulev, even though Pulev is an excellent athlete himself who moves well, I just don't think Pulev's game is geared for guys who move as well as him. And I don't think Pulev's defense is geared for guys who can lead with power shots, knockout punches, with either hand, like David Haye. Right? So I understand here online, Haye's one of the more controversial fighters. Right? There are many of you who believe he's really just a salesman and not a boxer. I'm here to tell you, you shouldn't think of David Haye as a cruiserweight, because in the heavyweight division, he's one of the hardest punchers there. I believe he hits harder than Kubrat Pulev. We'll find out on Fight Night. I like David Haye over Pulev. I would not be surprised if David Haye not only gives Pulev his first loss, but does so by KO. Let me hear from you. Leave your comments for me here online. Visit us at gamblersadvisory.com. Thanks for stopping by.